Meet Dean Rocket Hall, aka the Human Grenade. As legend has it, sometime between 2009 and 2012, Dean was doing military training in the Brunei jungle, where he burned through his food too quickly and was left on the edge of starvation. This on top of suffering from, quote, local water-induced stomach problems, which to me sounds like code for the shit.
Is that normal pooing you're doing?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Doesn't sound normal, right? Doesn't smell normal.
It is, honestly.
He managed to catch 2 fish, but lacked the energy to make a fire and cook the fish. Then 3 days later, he was so hungry that he ate the rotting fish carcasses. His hair started to fall out, his nails turned yellow, and on top of it all, he got really badly injured, resulting in him having to undergo some sort of surgery. And it was here, covered in leeches, in the middle of a jungle in Brunei, that the idea for DayZ mod was born. Dean used this fairly harrowing experience in the jungle as inspiration to create a mod for Arma 2. A lone player spawns in an almost empty Chernarus and must scavenge for items and weapons while contending with other players doing the same. Originally, he pitched it to the army as a way of simulating the emotions he felt in the jungle. He figured it could be used to train soldiers, because you see pretty much every army in the world uses a version of Arma called Virtual Battle Space, I think it's called, to train soldiers. And Dean has prior experience in making games, having previously worked at Shadi Interactive, making movie tie-in games, Speed Racer the game to be specific. Ultimately, the army decided that they weren't interested, and Dean would probably have to spend his whole career championing the mod to his higher-ups if he wanted to see it implemented. So Dean went back to doing army things, whatever that entails.
He's closing in!
I think we have a few minutes before he gets here.
Until sometime later, when Bohemia Interactive, the makers of the Arma series, hired Dean on a contract basis to work on Arma 3. Dean had showed them a different mod he had made for Arma, which has never been released, one that sees the player floating in space like an astronaut. So the New Zealand-born Dean packed his bags and went to the Czech Republic without even knowing the language and worked on Arma 3. While working on Arma 3, Dean took the mod that he had created to simulate the emotions he felt when he was in the Brunei jungle, he added zombies to it, and he called it DayZ.
And originally it wasn't really released. What I did was I put the download link in the one server I was running in New Zealand, and then people somehow managed to figure out how to install it and connect, and then they talked about it and they told their friends, they posted on the forums, and next thing you know, now we have 420,000 unique players.
Throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s, zombies were creeping up on the zeitgeist. It started in Asia with games like Resident Evil.
This case was just too weird. This case was...
Then movies like Versus. Then 28 Days later came out. Then Shaun of the Dead came out.
There's a girl in the garden. What?
Then Left 4 Dead came out.
Kill all sons of bitches. That's my official instructions.
Dawn of the Dead remake came out, Zombieland, until it all culminated in the phenomenon that was The Walking Dead TV show.
You try one of these? They're chewy. They, got some fat in them.
The movies and TV shows centering around zombies were all about survival. The logistics of gathering supplies, finding safe places to sleep, and most importantly, how the biggest danger probably wouldn't be the zombies, but your fellow survivors. But games about zombies at this time pretty much boiled down to shoot zombies in face and watch their heads explode. DayZ Mod was different. DayZ Mod was a zombie apocalypse simulator. The experiences that writers were manufacturing in TV shows and in movies, they organically happened to you in DayZ. You would run into ruthless bandits that you couldn't escape from. You wouldn't be able to find food and would find yourself on the edge of starvation. Your friend would get killed and you would embark on an adrenaline-fueled revenge story. However, for every decent story that you would get out of running around Chernobyl, there were 100 runs where you would die because of hackers, or because you glitched into a fucking wall, or because you had the gall to try and vault over something.
I have a 2 drums down.
What?
You can't jump. What happened? Did you try to jump it?
Yeah.
Like, you'd be running in that game and your legs would just fucking break out of nowhere, and you wouldn't even know why.
Oh,
On top of the fact that Arma 2 DayZ was capable of bringing even the beefiest of PCs to their knees, meaning that for most people with average computers, DayZ Mod was a chugfest. Furthermore, Arma 2 is, by design, a fairly inaccessible and clunky game, and you had to manually install DayZ by tinkering with files. There was so much going against DayZ's success, and yet the 0.000000001% of encounters that you had that were genuinely thrilling and terrifying were worth battling through all of that bullshit.
Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Legends like Frankie on PC and Jack Frags, who made edited videos, show people what was possible with the mod when you A, had more than 10 FPS, and B, had some good game sense and were decent with the complex and realistic shooting mechanics. There were 4 types of DayZ mod players, and this has kind of stuck around even to this day. There's...
Before I get you little coastal cuties geared up like you're about to invade Normandy.
This is where every player starts. A newbie spawning on the shores of Chernarus with no idea what they're doing, but with dreams of becoming like their favourite DayZ YouTuber. Then, depending on this particular coastal cutie's mental fortitude and how other players in the game treat them, they become one of 3 archetypes. Killed every player they saw on site fairly indiscriminately. These players would rarely use direct chat to talk to people, and if they did use direct chat, it was probably just to insult your mother or something.
Not for long, motherfucker. Dodge this.
This made up the bulk of DayZ players. These players might kill on sight, they might not kill on sight. Their morality was usually defined by how much gear they had. If they had nothing, they wouldn't shy away from hatcheting another player just for their Winchester, but if they were relatively geared up, then they might allow that Winchester player to go on with their life as long as they pose no threat to the survivor. They would occasionally use direct chat to team up with other survivors for safety, but they weren't particularly trusting and generally stick with their pre-made groups or by themselves. These players had the smallest numbers, but arguably had the biggest effect. They went out of their way to help other players, especially fresh spawns and coastal cuties. They would only shoot if negotiations through direct chat were impossible, or would shoot because they were being fired upon for no real reason. These players together made up the DayZ ecosystem.
Because I took griefers, and I took the people, let's call them Care Bears, and I put them together. And the Care Bears needed the griefers because they give that sense of fear to the situation. And the griefers need the Care Bears because they need someone to kill.
And this ecosystem was enforced by a fairly crude karma system. Every player starts with a neutral amount of humanity. Giving players blood bags and other medical items would increase this humanity, whereas killing survivors or killing heroes would decrease this humanity. August 2012, Dean announced that he and Bohemia Interactive would be making DayZ into a standalone game. They were doing a lot of things during this time. They were fucking with the engine, they were adding buildings to the map, enterable buildings, because most of the buildings in Arma 2 weren't enterable. December 2013, the game was released in very, very early access. It was broken.
Let's do it! I live!
I am truly a man of steel!
And had very few features, very few guns, but like the mod, it had the potential to create emotional, organic stories.
Stop there. Take them off.
Stop. Just lay on the floor. In the name of love.
Give us your shoes.
However, one unforeseen consequence of the standalone was that lowering the barrier of entry, i.e. the fact that you no longer had to tinker with game files to get the game to work, it ran slightly better than the Arma 2 mod did. It meant that you had a lot of new players joining, which sounds good, but basically these new players kind of just turned the game into a deathmatch. However, this was kind of unavoidable, seeing as the mod and the standalone offer very little to do outside of collect items, stay alive, and shoot people.
See how it is.
Perhaps this is a consequence of the mod's origins as a tool to train soldiers. This wasn't something you were meant to spend your life doing, just something you did for a few hours as part of training. But now people were spending their life doing it, and outside of shooting and looting, there wasn't really anything else to do. Some players took this sandbox nature to their advantage and would make up stories in their own heads, reasons they needed to travel to a certain place or do a certain thing, and this kept these players sane and civil, and they would still try and interact with others and not always just resort to playing it like it's a deathmatch. But for most of the players, the pointlessness of the whole experience and the empty sandbox nature of the game drove them into a kind of existential insanity. They descended into using bugs to their advantage, glitching into walls where they could still shoot out, but they couldn't be seen by anyone on the outside, gearing themselves up inland, then returning to the shore just to shoot fresh spawns like a duck hunt. This also started happening with the mod as well, but while standalone was still trying to find its footing and stop players from sinking into the floor, the DayZ mod was branching out. You had different game modes like Epoch, Origins, Overwatch, Overpop. They introduced new mechanics, including an in-depth base building and traders to the game, along with a flurry of different maps: Namausk, Taviana, Pantheria, Lingor. That's all I can think of, but I'm sure there are more. DayZ players around this time were presented with a choice. You could either play the standalone, which is an incomplete game that had the potential to be the zombie apocalypse simulator you wanted, but in its current state had like 3 zombies per server, and those zombies pose no threat to the player. There were like 4 guns, and it was rampant with hackers and players abusing exploits. Or you had a military simulator that was trying its best to emulate a zombie apocalypse simulator, but has a truckload more features, zombies that can actually pose a threat to the player, and a hacker problem that was less rampant. Whichever one you chose, it felt like you were compromising on something.
What the fuck?
E3 2014, Dean said that they were going to be swapping over to a new engine or rejigging the existing engine completely. So they could add stuff like having dynamic lighting and hordes of zombies and, running at a decent frame rate, things like that. Then towards the end of 2014, Rocket gave the infamous interview in which he referred to himself as a grenade. He said he liked to go into places and just blow his load over everything: the walls, the people, the computers, the floor, and then he likes to go somewhere else and just blow his load over them as well.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children too.
He just loves blowing loads. And as a result, he felt that he had blown his load and that there was nothing more for him to do on DayZ, so he would be leaving the DayZ development team and starting up his own studio at the end of 2014. Many in the community felt that this was a betrayal. From their perspective, he said he was going to make DayZ into a game, made a buggy and incomplete alpha in a very slapdash way. Then he ran away with the money so that he could go do something else.
I remember reading a Reddit thread about the California wildfires, trying to find out information about it because I've got a lot of friends who live in California. And I'm halfway down and someone's like, wow, this looks like, a DayZ hellscape. And then I see someone reply, oh, isn't that game that didn't get finished? And then someone goes on this big rant about Dean Hall, and they're talking about me, and I'm like, you don't even know who I am.
And this wasn't helped by the fact that in the same interview where he announced he was leaving, he kind of poo-pooed on DayZ, saying that it's a fundamentally flawed concept. I don't think Rocket did any of this maliciously. I don't think he ran away with the money, so to speak. I just think he realized what we all now know, that a zombie apocalypse simulator only works if the players in the zombie apocalypse simulator treat it like a zombie apocalypse simulator. But 99% of DayZ players treat it like it's PUBG, and as a result, DayZ is basically just a persistent battle royale with zombies. Rocket set up his new studio at the end of 2014 like he said he would. He called it Rocket Works, which is pretty funny because he's only made one game up until that point and that game doesn't fucking work. Things would continue like this for a good long while. A good long while. Standalone development had just kind of stalled. They were slowly adding things to the game, but none of them felt like they did anything. They never felt like they changed the experience in any way. Mostly it felt like they were just fighting to keep bugs and hackers at bay. Features were being added, but the core elements like zombies and not running like dog shit remained the same, and were gonna remain the same until this new engine came in. The DayZ development team was stuck in a fairly nightmarish development cycle of adding items and features, which introduced new bugs and glitches, which they then had to fix, only to add more items and features which reintroduced old bugs as well as new ones that then had to be fixed, all the while in the background making such drastic changes to the engine that it becomes unrecognizable, knowing that when they implement these drastic changes, they would have to remove a lot of the stuff they've spent their time adding and fixing bugs for, because these drastic changes to the engine would break those systems. Basically, they were making two games. They were spending half their time and energy into adding features and fixing bugs to the game designed to be obsolete in a few years, and spending the other half of their time and energy into making that game's replacement, and DayZ suffered because of it. 2018, the new engine came out, and this was the start of the DayZ that we know today. And over time, mostly thanks to the talented modding community, DayZ has slowly been rising in players since then, and January 2024, it had 40,000 average players, which is nearly double what it saw at its peak in 2014. And that's great, but as DayZ is now, I don't really think it's the game that was conceived back in 2012. It's a really big, really complicated deathmatch with base building and zombies. It's great at being a really big, complicated deathmatch with zombies and base building. However, when DayZ started, it was about survival and the feeling of fear and tension, but that feeling evaporates very quickly after a few spawns, and you learn that basically when you encounter someone, they're just going to try and either shoot you or beat you to death.
There you go, mate.
Soon the only way you can get enjoyment out of the game is with the satisfaction that comes when you kill another player. The game does an excellent job of realistically simulating the physical elements of being in a zombie apocalypse, unloading magazines and loading bullets in one by one. Items become damaged when they are shot at. You can't eat if you're wearing a gas mask. What are you doing? What the madman? The fuck? Drink it, you fucking dork. There's no actual difference between dragging the beans to your hand, dragging a knife to your hand, opening the beans with your knife, then being able to eat the beans, or just right-clicking on the beans and selecting eat fucking beans. Sure, visually it looks more realistic, but it doesn't feel any more realistic, I don't think anyway. Most of the time it just feels more annoying. Problem is that when you're starving to death, your reaction is just, oh, my food is blinking, I need to run towards a town full tilt and get some food. The game does very little to simulate the psychological effects of living in a zombie apocalypse. You can kill countless people and nothing changes. The humanity meter that was in DayZ mod was very simple and didn't really work all that well. There were so many situations where it's like I did the right thing and I feel like I should have been gaining humanity for that, but the system just wasn't able to recognize that I was doing a good thing because it's not, it's not genius, it's very simple. But in my opinion, the humanity meter is the solution to the deathmatch problem. Perhaps if you've killed enough people, then you start to see phantom players. This would lead bandits to start shooting players who aren't actually there. Bandits, survivors, and heroes should all have unique walk and run animations so you can tell them apart at a distance. And this one's a bit out there, but what if the game records the few seconds when you shoot another player and will randomly fade that video up while you're playing, and then kill enough players and suddenly you're being constantly haunted by them? It should cut both ways though. Bandits should sway less when they're aiming, as they're used to aiming at players and killing. Perhaps survivors sometimes can't even kill another survivor, like the gun just aims away at the last second. I also think that constantly moving around the map should decrease your humanity. If you're literally just running from one place, looting, and then moving on to another, I think that would affect your mental state. Staying in one place and, I don't know, some form of in-game meditation should increase your humanity, and this would also present bandits with a way of atoning for their sins. I'm not saying it needs to be these specific psychological effects, I'm just saying there needs to be something to incentivize players not to just shoot each other. Now obviously in an ideal world, these psychological effects would be happening within the player's head in real life, but when everyone has grown up playing video games like COD and Battlefield, shooting players is just a fucking, it's like buttering toast, bro. Like I do it without even thinking about it. However, if players were incentivized not to shoot each other and the game became not just a big deathmatch, then what the fuck would anyone do? If you're not just looting for the shooting, then why are you looting in the first place? Do you get me? To build bases and raid other bases, but to me that's just looting and shooting on a bigger scale. Now again, it doesn't have to be this, it doesn't have to be, like this is a dumb thing that I thought of. Well, let's say that there's a fucking atomic bomb at the top of Chernobyl, and there are 3 clans, let's just say red, blue and green, and each clan starts with an equal share of the map, everyone starting off with no clan, then depending on their interactions with the clans, friendly or unfriendly, they choose who they want to join or choose to remain clanless. Clans' territories can move and shift by capturing and holding certain outposts. Each clan's objective is to acquire supplies, weapons, vehicles, and people for the end just before the server wipes, when the door to the nuke opens and every clan fights to be the one to push the button, so to speak, and you destroy Chernobyl forever. Server wipes and then you rinse and repeat. And even if you don't join a clan and just play the game how it is now, that's still an interesting backdrop. I'm aware that like clans do just form on servers, rivalries get started just organically, and that's cool, but I feel like that's such a minority thing. Like I feel like very, very, very few DayZ players actually experience that.
So you're not a merry man anymore? I don't need to shoot you?
I'm not a merryman for like 3 months, or wait, for a longer time than that.
Yeah, 3 months isn't very. 3 months isn't very long, and those son of a bitches just robbed me like last week up there. They tased me and took my revolver.
I left. When was that?
It was about a week ago. So you see any merry men, you feel free to shoot them for Waldorf, and then get my goddamn revolver back. It was all of them. Oh Jesus Christ!
Oh, what the fuck?
That's probably the merry man.
Now obviously all these things, the psychological effects and the clan bullshit, is only a solution if you see the DayZ deathmatch problem as a problem, but I think most people, considering the high player count, seem to like the deathmatch, which is fair enough, I guess. Dean said this thing once in Rezzed, I think it was, where he was talking about Minecraft Tekkit, if you remember Minecraft Tekkit.
My friends would be like, let's play Tekkit, let's build a nuclear reactor. But in the back of my mind, I'd always be going, why are we doing this? And they're like, because we can get lots of energy. And I'm saying, well, what are we going to do with the energy? And that's where the context comes from. And that's what I think is really important.
And I don't think DayZ has ever solved that problem. I want to get more loot. Why? So I can shoot people better. Okay, why? So then I can gather supplies and build a base. Why? So I can shoot people and defend my shit. Why? Because DayZ lacks any context for its gameplay, and therefore the only enjoyment to get out of the gameplay is by playing the game, but the only really enjoyable thing in the game is shooting players, so it's like you kind of get funneled into one avenue, which is murder everyone. And when everyone gets funneled into that one avenue, then it just becomes a deathmatch. Sometimes context does organically happen. You know, you run into people and, you know, a story just happens, but it's rare and it feels like it's only gotten rarer as time has gone by. But that lack of context for me is why I feel DayZ is the game that never was. The experience that DayZ mod hinted at in Arma 2 never really fully materialized in DayZ standalone. It got part of the way there, but encountered too many roadblocks and too many stresses and too many things compounding on it, so it eventually just decided to become a big deathmatch, a very big, persistent deathmatch. No other game has really attempted to do this. There have been loads of zombie apocalypse simulators or zombie apocalypse survival games since DayZ's start, but they all have a few things wrong with them. Most of them are fairly arcadey, some of them even have like levels and things and don't feel very realistic. DayZ also has the advantage of being built on top of a military simulator, so it has that gritty, realistic, clunky feel to it, which is what you want. Even though in my opinion they have kind of toned down the clunkiness with DayZ, which, you know, kind of sounds like a good thing. They've toned down the clunkiness and made it more smooth, but I feel like real life's kind of clunky. Doing things in real life would be even like more clunkier, if that makes sense. So being able to do things so quickly and so smoothly kind of takes away from this realistic factor. DayZ kind of feels like it has more in common with something like Battlefield now than it does Arma 2, really. Battlefield with, like, you know, an inventory. I'm just rambling now. Yeah. That's it, really. Bye.